Okay, so I'll open the opening prayers. Let's see if I can get this enlarged. Oh, there we go. Oh, I see it. Okay. Sashi Dogi Juji Medo Tam Rira Legion in the Gambadi Sange Shindu Mide Wagi Adogo Nanda Jinga Jubajo Idam Guru Rana Mandala Sange Judan Zogi Jonam Jaju Badu Dani Gazuji Dagi Juji Gibezunangi Dola Beji Sange Dubajo Sange Judan Zogi Jonam La Jaju Badu Dani Gazuji Dagi Juji Gibezunangi Dola Beji Sange Dubajo Sange Judan Zogi Jonam La Jaju Badu Dani Gazuji Dagi Junyan Gibezunangi Dola Benji Sange Dubar Shu. Okay, so I thought before I start diving into the text, Stevie asked a question on email today. So Stevie, I wanted to I responded to your email, but I wanted to show you the lineage tree of Tsongkhapa and point out with my pointer exactly what I was talking about. Stevie's question was, what was Nagarjuna's relationship to Tsongkhapa? And so you can see in the lineal tree, in the center is Tsongkhapa, and from his heart, these two rainbows come out. And above the rainbows, there's groups of teachers. And to his left, at the top of that group, here in the middle is Manjushri. And right over here, right above and to the right is Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna, who appeared 400 years after Lord Buddha, was prophesized by Lord Buddha. And he really expounded the profound view lineage of voidness and dependent origination. And then from him to his disciples, Aryadeva, and down eventually to Buddha Palita and to Chandrakirti, all those great sages of India. Then those teachings came down through the three groups of Kadampa Geshes that are in this middle line here. And then all of those profound lineage teachings came to Tsongkhapa, who's depicted right here. So he got all of that transmission of profound view lineage. And as I said many times, he started to actually have direct visions of Manjushri. And so when he got stuck on a point, he could ask Manjushri directly, like, this lineage says this lineage says that, which one's right? And he and Manjushri would talk just like we're talking now. And so he clarified those profound view lineages, teachings, and then those were passed through these lineage lamas. And that empty space is for your own root lamas. Right? And so over on to Tsongkhapa's right is in the middle up here is Maitreya Buddha. And he is the source for the widespread activities lineage of the Bodhisattvas. And around him are all those great lamas, starting with the Sangha, who took those teachings and then transmitted them down through the same groups and eventually to Tsongkhapa and to his spiritual disciples. And that's how we got the lineage of widespread activities. So both of those represent, on Tsongkhapa's right, relative bodhicitta and all the activities that come from it. And on Tsongkhapa's left, ultimate bodhicitta, the profound view which liberates, and all the activities from that. Together, these two sources and these two vast instructions in Tibetan are called tabshe. Tabshe. Anybody ever heard Taba and Sherab? Taba means method. Sherab means wisdom. And so short, Tabshe. And you'll hear that a lot if you listen to a lot of teachings. It's talking about these two vast lineage of instruction that came to Tsongkhapa. Above him, right directly here, you see a line of Manjushris, right? Going straight up. That's the Ganda and Mahamudra lineage that came straight to Tsongkhapa from Manjushri. And then you see these other two lineages on his left and these other two lineages on the right. Those are 4 classes of highest yoga tantra that came to Tsongkhapa. You can see the deities on top. The Ganda and Mahamudra came from Vajradhara through Manjushri to Tsongkhapa straight to him. And then you'll see Yamantaka, Guhya Samaja, Chakrasavara, Hevajra, those great highest yoga tantra deities. And around him, all of your root and lineage lamas here, and then all the 4 classes of tantric yidams, and then all the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Viryas, Varinis, Dharma protectors. So all of those are embodied in that central figure, Tsongkhapa. So I hope that answers the question. So why are we spending so much time with Nagarjuna, right? Nagarjuna, actually there was an account about a encounter between Tsongkhapa and a great Nyingma Lama of his time. And this Nyingma Lama had the ability to directly see and talk with Vajrapani, the embodiment of the tantric teachings and Buddha's power in a form of a bodhisattva. And so Tsongkhapa asked many questions to Vajrapani. And Vajrapani, in his responses, said to Tsongkhapa that he has to clarify the correct view, starting with studying Nagarjuna. And from there, from Nagarjuna, the correct view came down to Aryadeva. And through Aryadeva, it came eventually to Buddhapalita. And from Buddhapalita, eventually it came to Chandrakirti. The text we're going over, one of the great commentaries to it was by Chandrakirti, which is translated in this book by Joseph Lorenzo, Luizo. And then what happened is that it came to great lamas, but some of them had little different views of their own. It kind of got added in. And so by the time that Tsongkhapa appeared, some of the teachings were falling a little bit into either eternalism or nihilism. And so that's why Tsongkhapa for a while got confused. And he went into retreat. He did a lot of purification. As I said, eventually he was able to see Manjushri directly. And so then he clarified those muddy points where people had gotten confused along the way. And so he revitalized and clarified those teachings on profound view. So the commentaries that we're getting, that we're going over, actually came from Tsongkhapa's lineage in terms of that clarified presentation of Nagarjuna's point. And I'll still hear the wrong views today. For example, I was doing these inner Buddhist faith activities for decades. And there was one um, scholar on Buddhism who approached me and accused Nagarjuna of nihilism. And I realized that this professor, with all his knowledge, completely missed the point. He didn't understand Nagarjuna at all. And and so that's the kind of misguided view that Tsongkhapa had to correct. And anyway, so I hope that helps. Why so much focus on correct view? This is the reason, right? Our marquee, you are here. If you're smart, you start to figure out the world's a pretty messed up place. Is there some way to get out of this mess, right? And that's really what's being talked about in the 60 verses. What we've gone up through now, the first 10 verses that we went over, it gets into those two polar opposites that are wrong views that can misguide you so that you can't find your way out of samsara. One of them is nihilism, which Nagarjuna hits right off the bat. First swing, his first verses was nihilism is just wrong. And that view of nihilism is what that scholar said to me when he thought that Nagarjuna was teaching that nothing exists, which is not at all the point. In fact, I'll quote Nagarjuna to you. This is from the Ratnavali. As long as a person still grasps the heaps, the five skandhas, as self-existent, there will still be belief in a self, which leads to karma and rebirth. Does that sound nihilistic? That's Nagarjuna. He's teaching, yeah, there's rebirth, there's karma. Where does it come from? It comes from the misapprehension, the mistaken apprehension that the aggregates of our body and mind constitute a self, right? So it's not saying they don't exist. It's saying that they don't have self-existent nature, right? And so the first 10 verses really get into this. As I say, he starts right out with refuting nihilism. And then Nagarjuna moves into questioning the realist schools, the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika school of philosophy in the lower schools of Buddhist philosophy. All the Buddhist schools agree that this wheel of samsara is our main enemy, right? From all those early schools up through Mahayana and Vajrayana. Being stuck here in an unenlightened way is suffering. Anywhere you go in cyclic existence, it's suffering. Why? At the hub, our minds are contaminated by the ignorance, represented by the pig, which holds our impermanent, insubstantial body and mind constituents as a self, right? That's one aspect of that ignorance. It grasps to me, and then it grasps to mine. This is my body. These are my thoughts. These are my, right? This is my room. This is my house. This is my land. This is my religion, right? All those grasping, self-grasping thoughts are why we suffer. That's one form of ignorance, probably the main one. that we're trying to get rid of through the lineage of profound view. That's exactly what these teachings are aiming at, is to dispel that misapprehension of ourself and our world that's causing us to suffer. The second form of wrong view is a relative wrong view that denies cause and effect, that doesn't apprehend karma. So to begin with this one, and this is why I objected to Joseph's translation of dependent origination as relativity. I think that relativity is a good word for some aspects of dependent origination. But when we think relativity, we think Einstein, his theory of relativity, which is good for thinking about how nothing is as it seems. Right? It's good that way, but it doesn't give you a sense of origination. How do things come into being? So to get closer to understanding what we're talking about here in these 16 verses, which is dependent origination, that's a better word than relativity, I think, or a set of words. I'll ask this question: where did you come from? So just contemplate that a little bit. Here you are. Where did you come from? That's a big thought, isn't it? To try to peer back through the tunnel of your experiences, right? How far back can you go in your memory of where you came from, right? Very few of us can penetrate back even into early childhood memory. Before that, most of it is dark. We don't know. We don't know. We can tell from science that at some point our parents must have had intercourse, right? And that the substance of the father and mother started a little fetus, and that fetus eventually grew, and then eventually we were born and named and raised and fed, and we kind of know that through logic. But is that a direct perception or a logical conclusion, right? So dependent origination not only looks at our relativity, but it looks at that question: where did we come from? Where did the world come from? And through that, in that analysis comes the next question of where are we going? What's coming next, right? And of course, the Buddhist answer to those questions is kind of unsettling. You know, if you're raised in a Western point of view, you've probably been exposed to two main theories about those questions. One theory is it's just a biological coincidence of science. When you die, so does your mind. Don't worry about it. Just take drugs or try to forget about it or drink, right? Which is nihilistic. That response is nihilistic. On the other extreme, the other answer to those fundamental questions that we were raised in is, oh, there's an all good, all powerful God who created us for a special purpose. And if we live out that purpose in the right way, when we die, we go to heaven. And if we mess up, we go to hell for eternity, which is unsettling in its own way, right? But the problem with that frame of where did the world and its beings come from is, if this God who's all powerful and all good is truly benevolent, why all the suffering? Why are those little kids getting bombed in Gaza? You know, why are the Ukrainians being blown to bits? Why are people in poverty and unable to survive? Why is so much violence on the streets? If God's in charge of all this, why not just stop it? Right? And then you'll hear, well, that's the mystery. um, Buddhism is very different. It doesn't presuppose a creative force that's trying to keep everything on track. In the Abhidharmakosha, it says, Lele Jiktan Natsoke. From cause and effect, karma, the various worlds arise. Those worlds include the universe, and those worlds include us beings migrating in and out of birth and death. And we're not completely on our own, because along the way, from a Buddhist perspective, a few of us have woken up, like the Buddha, and seen dependent origination and how it works. How did the Buddha come into being? Through wisdom. Through wisdom and compassion, those two bodhicittas. How do sentient beings come into being? Through ignorance. And out of ignorance comes desire. And out of desire comes hatred for whatever threatens that sense of self. And then the deeds we do, good or bad, either take us up into realms higher than where we are, or they take us lower into realms filled with more terror and suffering. And through those 6 realms, we cycle and cycle and cycle through the 12 links. In all of that, existence is held in the jaws of death. So not a very happy picture of where we are, right? But luckily, outside of that mess, there's the Buddha who freed himself, right? And through wisdom, seeing dependent origination accurately and behaving in accord with cause and effect. And he's pointing to the clear moon, which represents that state of full enlightenment. And he said, hey, come here, much better. Don't stay stuck there, right? So that's what this is about. And again, that's where it came from. That's the lineage that it came from. And so that brings us back to the text. Any questions on that part? I know that was a big overview. Okay, let me see if I can find the verses in English where we are. All right. Last time we got up to verse 10. As a review, I'll just mention verse 9. This is the debate going on between the realist and Nagarjuna. You claim if the aggregates have not ceased, though addiction ceases, there is no nirvana. So this is what the realists were believing. I told you all the Buddhist schools believe in that wheel of existence. They all believe that we lack a self. Why? Because if you look at what we call ourselves, we can break it down into the physical part of ourselves, the feelings, the discernments and conceptualizations, the impulses, and the awarenesses, sensory and mental awarenesses, right? So all the schools see that. And they say, so if there are this multiplicity of parts, how can you claim a self to that, right? An indistinguishable, indivisible self that is unproduced, right? That's a silly notion, right? However, where the realists disagreed is that the realists thought that there were really true aggregates, that the aggregates themselves had the self-nature, if you will. And that's what Nagarjuna is arguing against. So the realists are claiming that the aggregates, if they have not ceased, even though you've gotten rid of desire and craving and grasping at a self, then there is no nirvana for you. Sounds like the soup Nazi. No soup for you. No nirvana for you. You still have the aggregates, right? And so they have this thing of nirvana with and without remainder. And that's what we got into last time. Nirvana without, and you'll see this. It's really, I find this liberating because when you read different Buddhist sources, you'll see these different points of view in different school systems. And so it's really nice to know what the Madhyamaka take on those different viewpoints is. I find it really liberating and really revealing. So anyway, the idea of nirvana without remainder is when you die, if you've attained nirvana and you've extinguished the desire and the self grasping, then for have total nirvana, your aggregates have to be destroyed. And so once you die, then that's nirvana without remainder, and you're done. That's it. No more you, no more continue. That's called destruction. Nagarjuna is saying, I think you missed the point. And you'll hear this, if you go to other school systems of Buddhism, they talk about Buddha's parinirvana. In those school systems, they see the parinirvana of the Buddha as the end of his continuum. That's it. Buddha was no more, is no more, because he worked out nirvana without remainder, right? Nagarjuna said, nah, that's not how it is. You can't stop the Buddha that easy. The Buddha's suffering stopped, yes. The causes of the Buddha's suffering stopped, yes. The obstacles to omniscience stopped, yes. But the continuum of enlightenment cannot be stopped. So it's a really radically different view than those lower school systems. And that's what's being debated here. So the second part of that verse, when here you have intricately, intrinsically ceased, only then absurdly will you be freed. So that's their debate. But Nagarjuna is saying that's BS. That's absurd, right? And he goes on in verse 10, and this is where we were last time. When one discerns with precise intuition what occurs, conditioned by misknowledge, remember the first link of dependent origination is ignorance? That's the misknowledge that's being referred to. One does not experience anything, whether ceased, whether created or ceased. So this is talking about the actual state where you go from a conceptual understanding of emptiness into a direct vision of emptiness. So let me show you the Tibetan. We can compare and contrast. Let's see, verse 10. Here we are. Mari Kin is the condition of ignorance. For those who read Tibetan, Marik means unknowing, not knowing. Kien is that conditional factor of unknowingness. Gi by that, Juala, arising, to that arising, conditioned by ignorance. Yangdak Yeshegi. Yangdak Yeshe is transcendent wisdom. Yangdak Yeshe is transcendent wisdom. Signa, if that looks at those things conditioned by ignorance, Gewa Dang Gakpa. Gewa is arising or birth. Gakpa is cessation. Um, whichever of those, Rung, whichever. Ganya Mikbar Migiro. And that means, see if I can find it, nothing at all can be found of any objective existence. And so this is getting closer to Nagarjuna's view. So if you take that cycle of existence that we were looking at, and you think about birth and death within this cycle of existence, everything in this existence of birth and death, I said, started with this inner hub in the pig of ignorance. That's marikpa, conditioned by that ignorance. Out of that come the afflictions of desire and hatred and the other afflictions. Out of that comes action. And so if you look up here at the rim, the ignorance can be seen here as a blind man with this cane. And he's fumbling around in the dark. Then conditioned by that ignorance, and again, it's two types, the ignorance holding the impermanent collection as if it's a self, and then the ignorance not understanding cause and effect, not understanding how karma works. So conditioned by that marikpa, ken, then we enter into action, which this is the second link here. It's a potter making pots. So we say something, we do something, we think something. All of those actions conditioned by ignorance create karmic formation, which is that second link. Then those contaminated karmic actions carried by the continuum of mind condition all the other links. 3, which is consciousness, then name and form is the 4th. Then the development of the sense faculties in the womb, then engagement between the sense faculties, their objects, and perceptions, right? Then feeling, pleasure, pain, then initial craving, then grasping, right? We're moving up the links. Then grasping leads to becoming, and that's the ripened karmas. And then when we die, those ripened karmas direct us into rebirth. And once we take rebirth, then we face old age and death. That's everything in samsara, and it starts here with ignorance. Anything conditioned by ignorance is going to pull us into that cycle of suffering. So, going back to the verse itself, go to the English. When one language is a little hard, the English. When one discerns with precise intuition, precise intuition is his translation of Yangdak Yeshe, which is pristine wisdom. Um, what occurs conditioned by misknowledge. That's I feel okay about that part of the translation. Yes. When you discern with wisdom, what happens when your ignorance is conditioning what you're doing and what comes out of what you're doing. One does not experience anything, whether ceased or created. So when you're meditating on who am I? Where did I come from? When you get into it, you get your mind in a calm place and you look at, okay, what am I? Right? Let's just take that one question. When you start searching through your body, do you find that me? Just take a moment. Look at the different parts of your body, right? You got your skin, you got your flesh, you got your bones, you got various organs in the body, right? All of those have cells. Within those cells, there are different configurations to make a digestive system, to make a cardiovascular system, to make a pulmonary system. Did you have control over the making of all these, by the way? How did they, and do you really know how they work? How they sustain you, right? There's the mystery, right? But as you look among all those different myriad parts of the body, do you find any you? What happens to that concept of you? Doesn't it disappear? That's when wisdom looks at those things that we have that were conditioned by ignorance. When you start peering into it, it disappears right before your wisdom. You can see, no, there's really no Wilson in this body, right? And Wilson doesn't have much control over it. If he did, he wouldn't be an old guy losing his hair. He'd be a young, vital person, right? But I don't have any control over it. Why? Because it's produced by karmic causation, and that's ripening in the way it's ripening. So a lot of people will then go, well, no, I'm not my body. I'm my mind, right? Well, let's look at that part of it. Which part of your mind are you? Are you are you the sensations of sight or sound or smell or taste or touch? Are you mental concepts? Are you feelings of pain? Are you feelings of pleasure? Are you feelings of indifference? All those are parts of that mind, right? Are you the different concepts and constructions of the mind and categories of cognition? Are you the impulses, anger or desire or love or compassion? Which ones are you, right? So you start dissecting through the mind. Do you find any really you? No. In the current configuration of aggregates, right? This is just them now. Where did they come from? At any step of what brought you to this place, did your aggregates have any self-nature? Did you have any real control over them? You know, you have relative control, but could you determine how your body formed when you were an infant? What what does determine that? The Buddhist view is that that's our karma, right? Karmic causation. There's the biological piece of it and its own unique cause and effect, which science has done a good job mapping, but still scientists scratch their head about the miracle of life, right? And then there's that mental piece. Scientists have gone too far into matter and they don't even believe the mind exists, except as an epiphenomenon, right? But there's evidence that it does, that it's a continuum. So when wisdom starts peering into things, what we thought was there disappears. Does that mean there's not a body and mind right here, right now? No, of course there's a body and mind here. So what is it that wisdom is seeing doesn't exist? A self nature to it. There's no independent self nature. Nothing exists independently. Not us, not the world, not the beings in it. And when wisdom sees that mikpa, I'll go back to the Tibetan for a second in verse 10, right here on the last line, mikpa, migyur. When you start to use your wisdom, how can any of those phenomena that are conditioned by ignorance that arise in us in the world, how can any of them have an objective existence? Mikpa is an apprehended entity, right? So as you were looking through your body and mind, did you apprehend an entity of me in that examination? Well, no. That's wisdom. It sees through that illusion of an appearing object having self-nature to it. Which brings us to the next verse, 11. That is, what we just did is called immediate nirvana. Bobby, yeah.
I hate to interrupt here, but this is like something that's really been bothering me for a long time. We have no self-nature. We're all empty. The Buddhas are empty too. They should also have no self-nature. So how come there's all these Buddhas with these traits? One's a compassionate Buddha, another's a wisdom Buddha, another is an activity Buddha. How come these Buddhas have individual traits if there is no self-nature and everything is empty?
That's a good question. The lack of self-nature and the emptiness, if you look at, and Nagarjuna actually was the philosopher who said that there are four aspects of a Buddha. Two aspects are called the form body, the Buddha's enjoyment body and the utilization body, or the activity body, Nirmanakaya. Those have different forms and different functions, right? Then the other two bodies, the wisdom body, the Dharma Kaya, and then the nature bodies, Svabhavika Kaya, those are the Buddha's mind. The Svabhavika Kaya is that emptiness. Yes, that's the ultimate nature, is empty of any self-nature. The part of the Svabhavika Kaya, the nature body of all those Buddhas, even though they have different aspects, different functions, everything else, exactly the same. Totally empty of any self-nature. There's no difference between the emptiness of all those Buddhas' minds and the emptiness of our mind. Exactly the same. We have that same nature. The only difference between our minds and the Buddhas is part of that Svabhavika Kaya of a Buddha is not only that their minds have empty natures, but they've eliminated all the afflictions and the obstacles to knowledge from that mind, so it's completely pure. We have yet to do that. We haven't had that success yet, but we're heading towards there. We want to get there, right? Then that Dharmakaya, that wisdom that precedes emptiness, anytime that we do what we just did and analyze our heaps and see that there's really no objective nature there, we're creating causes for that Dharmakaya in our own mind. So when you get then, I had one person ask me once, why bother developing like a body, a Buddha's body? I mean, once you see emptiness and you can free yourself of afflictions, you're good, which is true. But that's the attitude of a lower nirvana, right? Because even though, yeah, you're good, you know, all your moms aren't, all sentient beings are suffering. And there you are, you're like on vacation while they're all tormented and suffering. That's, if you have compassion, then that's not very satisfying, right? And so that's what happens to the Buddhists, because they develop both the relative bodhicitta of wanting to free all beings from suffering, very strong. They also develop this wisdom we're talking about, very deep, so that when they start to get rid of the afflictions and they start creating the causes for a form body along with the Dharmakaya, that form body starts to come into existence in an aspect that benefits beings. And because there are so many different needs of beings, there are myriad manifestations of that form body to accommodate them. Like if you read Samantabhadra's prayers, may I appear in whatever form accommodates the needs of sentient beings. May my voice take any language that they need to hear me, right? And so it's based on that myriad of conditions and dispositions of beings that there are so many different manifestations of enlightenment. But at that ultimate nature, they're all, they've perfected the Dharmakaya and purified their minds completely. That way, they're all the same. They're also, I asked Sarah McKenna once, you know, if there are all these Buddhas, what need for me to become a Buddha? There are already so many. And he said, well, each of us has our own individual karmas. And based on our histories and the karmic connections we have with beings, when we become enlightened, all those karmic connections become connections for those beings to meet with us, get teachings from us, and get benefit from us. So your karmic connections are unique to you. No other Buddha has them. And so it's really essential for you to become enlightened because of all those connections you have to help all those beings that other Buddhas can't reach. And that's also why different forms, different potencies. A lot depends on all that history that we have, right? So good question. But that's the best answer I could muster at the time. So so if we go to the 11th verse, let me see if I left anything out in what I said last time. As I said, that immediate nirvana doesn't see anything. And then, of course, the realists are going to object and then say, but then nothing exists. You're saying nothing exists. And of course, the rebuttal point from the Madhyamakas is because it is not perceived by transcendent wisdom, does not mean that entities don't exist because of because what is being perceived by that ultimate wisdom is a lack of self-nature, not the lack of existence. And this is like a key nodal point that gets lost when people just read Nagarjuna and there's nothing, doesn't exist, right? Um, or if you read the Heart Sutra, um, form is empty, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form, likewise feelings, perceptions, so forth. So when people hear the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, their minds easily fall into nihilistic misinterpretations unless they realize what's being refuted is that mikpa, the perceived object of a self-nature that we project onto ourselves and to phenomena. So that wisdom doesn't see any mikpa, no perceived object that exists from its own side. Right? That is immediate nirvana. Stevie, yeah.
So I've always, I sometimes think that this question, where is me? Where is, doing that kind of meditation is kind of like the old psychologically, don't think of the color blue, and all you think of is the color blue, And so I think it's lately become sort of this, it's like reality isn't the way I see it, but it is actually, and so I'm undoing that perception. But I think to myself, how did I know the blanket question answer is it came out of ignorance, but I just want to know, there has to be a reason that ignorance started, that to be there has to be this point, that, and then it isn't so much, well, it isn't this and it isn't that. Well, what is it then, other than compassion and kindness and serving others? What else could it be? I don't know. That probably didn't make any sense. Sorry.
Well, the first part of your question, I think I understood. And that's been a big debate question in Buddhism. Losang Chuki Gyaltsen, the great Panchen Lama, um, wrote a text called A Debate Between Wisdom and Ignorance. And that's one of the first points of debate. Ignorance approaches wisdom and says, I've been here from the beginning. You came later like horns on a bull, right? But I'm the original state. And then wisdom says, no, I've been here before you, but you haven't seen me until now. I've been here too, all along. So that's where the debate starts. But it doesn't posit a beginning. And that's going to be, in the coming verses, Nagarjuna is going to start to address those kinds of questions. Like one of the verses addresses, if things have no beginning, then how can you posit that they have an end?
Good, good.
Like what starts things? How do they come into being? If there's no beginning, then how can you say there's an end? Those kinds of questions aren't coming. So Nagarjuna is going to get into it.
I'm excited. Thank you.
All right. So what we just did can be called immediate nirvana. That is immediate nirvana. Dongche is a Tibetan. Young and day. Ganana depa. Dongche. The immediate dharma that's seen, that emptiness of self-nature. And that very thing is obtaining the goal. So when you do that meditation, temporarily you're attaining the goal. Temporarily. First we're doing it kind of conceptually and kind of not quite sure, right? But it's it's starting to shake the foundation of our individual samsara. If after that insight, after that insight into the truth, one discovers any particular here, imagining any sort of cessation in anything, however subtle, such an unwise individual does not see the meaning of conditioned arisal. So that's how this was translated. Let me show you the Tibetan, because that might help us a little bit. Okay, that's over here on this side of the page. Deni tongche yanglen de depe. Yanglen de de is nirvana. Yangyen is a bad experience. Lei from that. De means transcending the bad experience of samsaric existence, suffering. And Danyi, that very thing is when we're seeing that emptiness. Dongzhi is the Dharma that's being seen. So that itself is nirvana. Jawa Jepayin. Jawa Jepayin is a thing that is often quoted if you read sutras, where like Shariputra or another arhat will say, the task is done when they've reached nirvana. They finish the task is done, there's no more rebirth for me, right? You've probably heard that a lot or read that a lot. Galde, if so, see. If that happens, that understanding of the Dharma, juk is entered into. Tuksu afterwards, Dila, Jagagina, no, if Yunani, if there exists in the mind of that person who's ended it, and this is talking about direct experience of emptiness, we just did a conceptual exercise. But if one is able to reach Shine, calm abiding, and have a direct experience of that emptiness, then one actually enters into the process of removing your obstacles, your internal obstacles to nirvana. However, if such a person then is talking about Jadrak Yu, these different distinctions, and I'll get into what that means. And so then it goes to the next verse. I'll go back to the English, see how he translated it. So if that person is discovers any particulars in that emptiness, imagining any sort of creation in anything, however subtle, such an unwise individual does not see the meaning of conditioned arisal. Right, so this is getting into kind of a complex understanding of what that moment is when you see emptiness directly. So the last part of that verse that I mentioned is verse 12. And it starts here. Ngopo is entities. Ngopo is a produced thing or a functional object. Shintutrawa yang, even a very subtle entity. Tangi, by whatever such entity one imagines or perceives. Gewa, giving rise to any entity, however subtle. Nang takbar. Nang takbar is to impute. When you impute an entity in anything, however subtle it is that arises, nampa mi ke de, that person is completely unskillful. So nampar means utterly, mikepa means unwise. Such a person who imputes even any subtle, and this is again getting at the realist who, even though they had that initial experience of emptiness of self, still are clinging to a notion of self-existence gandhas, right? And so Nagarjuna is really facing him saying, that's really unwise. That's really unskillful to impute any even subtle existence to any object. Genle, genle junwe dun, this is like dependent origination. It's just different wording. Ken is conditions or conditional, lay from conditions, junwa arising, dun, the meaning of that conditioned arising, that meaning, matong, that person hasn't seen it. They haven't understood it. And so it's getting into some interesting philosophical territory. And I'll go to Yume Kemper and Pichet's commentary to it to unpack it. So, as I said before, if you continue to delve into dependent origination and you get to the point where you can see emptiness directly, you start to eliminate your afflictions until you can eliminate them from the roots. And that's where you get statements by arhats, I finished the work. My job here is done. No more rebirth for me, right? Such proclamations are valid for people who've actually penetrated directly and seen emptiness directly and then continued that experience until they remove their afflictions. Gongzhe, that seeing the Dharma is a seen event in your current life. And therefore, some will posit that as nirvana with remainder, right? And in some schools, they say, okay, you've reached nirvana if you see that emptiness, but you still have this remainder of your old heaps, right? Sepa, the word sepa means to terminate. I think that's in, let me see if I can find that in those verses. I don't see that there. Shepa is to know. Mikiwa means no rebirth is known. Both these realizations are seen simultaneously by one with sharp faculties. So when somebody with sharp faculties enters into that direct reception of emptiness, they can see, oh, I've done the job and no more rebirth is known for me. I won't come into rebirth. Some schools hold that people with duller faculties only see the first one, that my afflictions have been eliminated. And again, in this school, that doesn't come the first time you see emptiness. That comes after repeated immersions into emptiness as you wear away different layers of afflictions. Some schools say that it doesn't mean necessarily complete nirvana because later such dull faculty disciples will have their afflictions return. But most schools hold that once an arhat, you're always an arhat. So you might see those various school systems as you read different Buddhist texts. Some Vaipashika tenets hold that the arhat's status can be attained but then lost. that you might become an arhat, but then you can lose it if you're not careful, right? Mahayana Madhyamaka did not see it that way. We would probably say that person had a enlightening experience and probably removed some of their afflictions, but didn't go deep enough or long enough. The realists hold that mental states and particles are real. So those lower schools of Vaibhashika and Santrika think, like you've probably heard them, for Vaibhashika, when they talk about the absolute, it's the smallest form of particles, which we've translated as atoms, right? And then they'll say some mental states are also partless. And they hold that. But that's imputing, that's what's being referred to here as namtakpa. So middle way says you're imputing self-nature to these subtle particles in these subtle states, and that's still ignorance. That's really unskillful of you. So that's partly what's being referred to here. We hold that there's terminology that's used here that is good to know if you read it. One of the terms is called rang tsempa. Rang means self. Tsempa means marked or attributes. And so in these lower schools, they think that phenomena have kind of unique attributes that are kind of inherent to them. Whereas in Prasajika, they say there can't be any inherent anything. Those attributes are not inherent to the object. That's an imputation from your mind. And that's ignorance talking, not wisdom. And so that's, again, what's being refuted here in verse 12. So Madhyamikas attack any notion that any such characteristics could exist independently without existing on anything else. Realists counter in their debate that we do not accept that they are impervious to the influence of other factors, and we accept causation while also holding that there are self-nature aspects, which is kind of fudging, right? So we agree that they can be influenced and they're causally based, but they still have these aspects that are self-nature. We accept that self is nominally imputed on the five skandhas or onto the mind, and that entities like vases are nominally imputed on their collection of parts, but they hold that the subcomponents of such nominally imputed phenomena truly exist. So the atoms that make up the vase truly exist. The Prasajikas counter that any self-existence to any aspect of the entities would make cessation and karma impossible. So if there were these entities that were self-existent, how could they change? How could they transform? How could they impact anything else? That would be impossible. And as we know from quantum mechanics and physics, Prasajikas were right. This debate took place centuries ago, and Nagarjuna hit the nail on the head, which is why His Holiness often says that many of the, like for instance, Vasubandhu in his Abhidhamma Kosha, if he had to write that today in the light of modern science, he might have to change a few parts of what he said based on what's been found. But he said, Nagarjuna, Jadakirti, they wouldn't have to change a word because they seem to have pierced the veil and seen even to a very subtle level of how things are, including particulate matter. So anyway, That's really interesting, I think. So if there were self-existent atoms, they would be impervious to change and influence. Or a collection of elements is the basis for ascribing a self, but no individual element nor collection itself constitutes a self, merely a basis for ascribing my or me, mine. Okay. All schools below Prasangika hold that on its own, able to exist, a real substantial thing, that's the object to refute. So all schools below us think that way. We agree, we don't disagree with that. But they see that selfishness of the person is the voidness of an individual self. They see the view of perishables, jikta, that main ignorance that I talked about before, as the object to refute. It is not necessary to perceive emptiness, to perceive voidness of that self. This is what Prasajikas think. No, what lower schools think. In contrast, Prasajikas hold that one's holding to a sense of self based on one's experience of one's aggregates is not mistaken. This is interesting. So when you think I'm Stevie, or I'm Karuna, or I'm Bobby, or I'm Wilson, or I'm Sharon, or I'm David, Madhyamaka Prasangika don't think that's mistaken to say that based on our aggregates, as long as you do not see it as existing from its own side independently, inherently. If you see it as merely ascribed, well, Prasangicans will shake their head. Okay, yeah, there's a Wilson, there's a Stevie, there's a Karuna, there's a Bobby, there's a David, merely ascribed. To hold such imputed selves as if they exist inherently from their own side, that's the object to negate from a Prasangika point of view. The emptiness of such a self is equivalent to the emptiness of the aggregates as well. So Prasangika doesn't stop with the emptiness of the imputed self. They see the emptiness also to extend to the emptiness of the five aggregates. Each of the five aggregates doesn't exist from its own side at all. So for instance, before there was a Wilson, what was there? There was a fertilized ovum in my mom's belly. And then my parents, as it grew and started to eat and, and get bigger, they eventually called it Wilson. Before there is no even sense of any Wilson, right? Completely came out of that causes and condition nexus. And when it vanishes, it will be gone without a trace. So, oh, Marisa, you have your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, I always wanted to understand when we say there's what there is a mental continuum. Can you relate the notion of mental continuum, which is what continues supposedly, with this? Would you help me understand this?
Yeah. So when actually, so you'll know, I don't know if you're interested, but I just did a whole article on it. It actually got published in the Journal of Mind and Behavior, but it gets into this very point Like, what is it that dies? Is there rebirth? All that kind of stuff. But Prasangika Madhyamaka, when you get, let's take that, I was using my example of my birth, right? So when you have the fertilized ovum, that becomes the material cause for Wilson's body, right? And as it grows, eventually it becomes a basis that my parents can see and then say, oh, that's Wilson. Where does the mental part of that come from? That's where the debate is. In Buddhism, in lower schools too, like when Dharmakirti and Dignaga wrote their texts, they had a whole debate about this. What gives rise to a moment of mind? Dharmakirti said it cannot be matter. It cannot be a material cause. It must be a mental cause. Because this is just an old argument. If mind could arise from matter, then even stones would have consciousness, or sand or a piece of metal. But that's not the nature of material phenomena. Only a mind can perceive, feel, be aware. For something to be of mental nature, it must have come from a substantial cause that has a mental nature. So this is where Chandrakirti gets into his analogy of a seed and a sprout. So you plant a seed, right? It's got the soil and the moisture. What gives rise to the sprout? What's the material cause of the sprout? Is it the soil, the moisture, the sun, or the seed?
Sprout.
He would say it's the seed. The seed
Yep,
gives rise. But if you just have a seed, will it give rise to a sprout? No, you also need the soil, the moisture, the warmth, right? And those were called conditional causes. Again, things that support the seed being able to give rise to the sprout. So if you go back to the embryo, you have this unique substance of the parents giving rise substantially to the body. But what's the substantial cause for the mind? Even in scientific circles, there was a guy named Chalmers, a brain philosopher on the brain. And he called it the hard problem of consciousness. He said, widely it's assumed that mind comes out of matter, but we can't show exactly how it does so. This is where science is baffled. We have no adequate explanation of where consciousness comes from. But Buddhists do. It goes back to those early arguments of Dharmakirti. The substantial cause for a moment of mind must be a previous moment of mind. This was where the sciences get all confused because they see the beginning of the fetus and they can't see the mental continuum and where it starts. They can see the cause of the physical body. They can't see the cause of the continuum. Buddhists will say that since the first moment of mind in that fetus must have come from a previous moment of mind before the conception of that fetus, that it must have been from a mental continuum that preceded the conception of that fetus. And what did that moment of mind come from? It must have come from another previous moment of mind. And where did that one come from? And so there's no beginning. So the mind has no self nature, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so that continuum of mind cannot be shown to have a first cause. It's beginningless. So that's the Buddhist view, right? And that Prasanjikas would agree with that. That's going back to the analogy of a seed and its sprout. When the sprout comes out, where is the seed?
Gone. Gone. It's gone.
Gone. So when an effect produces its result, that cause is no longer there. You can't say it's in the effect either. Can you find the seed in the sprout? No. You know, it caused the sprout, but once it reduces its function of producing its result, it no longer exists. So that continuum that gave rise for the first moment of Wilson's mind in my mom's womb, once it gave rise to that first moment of Wilson's mind, was no longer existent. But it came out of a continuum, right? And then as the body and mind of that fetus grew and eventually became a baby, then it continued to evolve. But any moment of existence depends on the previous cause, which is now vanished. It's hard to wrap your head around, but that's the Buddhist view, right?
I
The
wish we
past.
could stay here forever talking about this. But the next, like because I feel like when we are praying for blessings to our mental continuum, to whom are we praying? To another mental continuum.
Yeah. Well, let's say the mental continuum of a Buddha or any enlightened being. That's like the external focus of our prayer. But part of it is also to our own continuum in Buddhism. That's our future enlightened being, is the subtle mind of our own heart, right? And so by praying that way, you're connecting the outer source of refuge with the inner source of refuge. And you're cultivating that relationship and growing.
Because I feel I don't know how to explain this, but I feel like as if we are this kaleidoscope, you know? And there's like this I mean, it's of course, like we cannot have words to describe this, right? Yeah. But I like we're here together and we have this perception that we are individuals or that we are each one in our place. I know that we're already past that, but I just want to say that it's just like we are just accustomed to having a sense of self. And it's just a pattern, a conditioning that we have. If I close my eyes and I don't see my body, maybe I can feel it. I can see something, maybe. And I am just more aware of the silence between the words. Like all of these things are like appearances, right? I'm just attached to a way of things appearing and ascribing a sense of self to what I'm just going moment by moment. I'm just used to thinking of me and mine. But really, I can be everything. I am all in. Everything is in me and I am in everything, right? Oh my goodness. Some articles on page 95. We need that. Wilson, please send us your article. Would you?
Yeah, I'll put it
No,
in.
no, I'm putting it up now.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have the publisher posted a link to it where you can go straight to the article. So I'll put that in the next announcement, the next class announcement too, if you want to read it. But it doesn't go into the depth that Buddhism goes into because I wrote it for scientists, like materials.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
But it does contain some of this logic in it. But in terms of what you're talking about, Marisa, I think that's what that enlightened view starts to be like.
Yeah.
It's natural that we cling to our aggregates as a me, right? That's kind of a natural impulse because that's what feels and that's what experiences, right? But when you start to grow your wisdom, you can see how relative that is and how impermanent it is. And that's where Nagarjuna is taking us. So that instead of getting all self-imploded on that inaccurate view, we can start to let it go and expand our horizons. But
yeah, and definitely so much easier to keep a sense of witness when you can see, oh, there's anger, there you go. Like, you know, oh, now I can feel the heat. Oh, that's the form. Like the heat, the light. Like you can like I think that by listening to this, you get a better like a more realistic understanding of the nature of reality that you can really clearly test every moment, you know, because you can kind of dissect it. Like now I'm feeling the heat in my arm. Okay, my arm heat, like like it's just like really fascinating. You can create a sense of, you
well,
know, aggregate.
that wisdom that's kind of witnessing all of that, that's eventually our resting place.
Exactly.
Right? When we can grow that wisdom more and more and more, then life and death gets manageable. Right?
I was once asked, who do Buddhists pray to? And the only answer that I came up with, and it was given to me and made sense to me, was to our future Buddha, to our own Buddha. That's all within us. That's what we do. And I love, and when I do my medicine Buddha practice, that becomes very apparent to be a fact. You know, the seven brothers with their specific prayers were for a very important, it was what was inside them already.
I would say that's one important piece, is to know that, you know, because you're really cultivating your own Buddha nature. That's what's happening. There are outer Buddhas. There are beings who already completed the journey, and we're relying on them at the same time. And you start to realize that through your teachers and through meeting other realized beings. But teachers like Lama Zopa Rinpoche would say, you can't see it, but you're always surrounded by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And so there is a team trying to help us connect with our Buddha nature and develop it. But we should probably stop here. I'm scheduling these classes. I'm trying to do one a month.
Okay.
You know, and in between do the Vajrayana classes. But
thank you, Wilson.
All right, so I'm going to put up the closing prayer. I got to say, it's nice to see all of you again. I missed this. It was a long time. A lot to tell, but we'll get into it in the Vajrayana class. So, Sashi Boogie Joji Medota, Rira Legion in the Gembadia, Sangation to Nida, Wagi, Dogunanda, Shingacha Basho, Iran Guru Rana Mandala Gandia, Yami. Gewadi Geogon, Sonamia Jezo Jim, Sonamia Jelation, where Dabo Kuni Dobasho. Jojo Sanjo Rimboje, Amaya Banang Yeguji, Yavan Yamba Mebayang, Gone Gondu Bawasho, Gari Rawe Goe, Shingande, Bendande, Wamalo, Juene, Genrezi, Wandens, and Gazo Ye, Shebe, Site, Badu, Deng Your Chi. All right, you guys, stay healthy. And I'll see you before
Thank you,
long.
Wilson.
So happy to see you there. So wonderful.
Thank
Long
you,
life,
Wilson.
keep
Wilson.
teaching. Long life, keep teaching.
Enjoy.
Wilson, my son's graduation